Imagine sleeping in your car every night. No bed. No roof. No one to call. Just you, the cold, and the silence. That was her life. A widow with nothing left. No savings. No family nearby. No plan. Just survival, one cold night at a time. Now imagine someone walks up to your car window one morning and tells you about a mansion for sale. Not for $1 million. Not for 100,000. Not even for 1,000. For $6. Six. Single. Dollars. You would laugh. Anyone would. It sounds like a joke. It sounds too crazy to be real. But it was real. Very real. She didn't laugh. She listened. And then she did something nobody expected. She said yes. Everyone around her thought she had lost her mind. The neighbors warned her to stay away. The city had already given up on that property years ago. The building was rotting from the outside. The windows were gone. The yard was swallowed by overgrown weeds and broken concrete. It looked like something out of a nightmare. But she walked in anyway. What she found inside those walls was far beyond what anyone could have prepared for. Not just broken floors and collapsed ceilings. Not just dust and darkness. There was something else. Something nobody knew about. Something that had been sitting there quietly for decades, waiting. And it was in the basement. She almost didn't go down there. The door was stiff. The smell was heavy. The darkness was thick. But something pulled her forward. One slow step at a time. And when she finally saw what was hidden behind that old crumbling wall, her hand started shaking and her whole life changed in an instant. Her name was Linda. And not long ago, her life looked completely different. She had a home. A real home. With a kitchen that smelled like coffee every morning and a garden she tended to every weekend. She had a husband who loved her. A routine that felt safe. A life that made sense. It wasn't perfect. But it was hers. And she was grateful for every single piece of it. Then one day, everything stopped. Her husband got sick. It happened fast. Faster than either of them was ready for. Within months, he was gone. And Linda was left standing in the middle of a life that no longer felt like hers. The bills kept coming. The mortgage didn't stop. The world kept moving. But she couldn't. She was frozen in grief while everything around her was falling apart. She tried to hold on. She picked up extra work. She sold what she could. She asked for help when the pride finally wore down enough to let her. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The house she had shared with her husband for over 20 years was taken from her. Just like that. Signed away on a piece of paper she could barely see through the tears. She packed what fit into her car. A few bags. Some photos. A blanket. And that was it. That was all she had left of the life she once knew. She started sleeping in parking lots. She would move from spot to spot to avoid being noticed. She ate whatever she could afford. Some days she couldn't afford anything at all. The loneliness was the worst part. Not the cold. Not the hunger. The silence. The feeling that the whole world had simply moved on without her. She was invisible. Forgotten. A woman who had done everything right and still ended up with nothing. But what Linda didn't know yet, sitting in that car, staring at nothing, was that the worst chapter of her life was about to lead her straight to something unbelievable. It was a Tuesday morning. Linda was sitting in her car, scrolling through her phone, looking for anything, any job, any opportunity, any small sign that things could get better. And then something stopped her cold. It was a property listing. A mansion. Old, massive, sitting on a wide piece of land in a quiet part of town. And the price sitting right next to it read just $6. She blinked. She refreshed the page. She read it again. $6. She almost kept scrolling. Part of her said it had to be a mistake. A typo. A joke somebody put online for fun. But something else, a quieter voice, told her to keep reading. The listing was real. The city had been trying to offload the property for years. Nobody wanted it. Nobody would touch it. The building had been sitting empty for over 4 decades, slowly falling apart from the inside out. The roof had caved in on one side. Every single window was shattered. The front door had rotted completely off its hinges. The yard was buried under years of wild overgrowth, broken concrete, and rusted metal. It looked like the kind of place people crossed the street to avoid. But Linda kept reading. She looked at the photos. Crumbling walls. Collapsed ceilings. Floors that had buckled and split. Dark hallways filled with dust and debris. And somewhere in the back of the listing, almost like a warning, a single line that said the basement had not been accessed or inspected in years. She should have closed the page. Any rational person would have. Instead, she picked up the phone and made a call. Within days, the paperwork was signed. The city officials who handed her the keys looked at her like she was making the biggest mistake of her life. One of them quietly asked her if she was sure. She said yes without hesitating. She took those keys. She drove to the property alone. She stepped out of her car and stood in front of that crumbling mansion for the very first time. And she felt something strange. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. But before she ever stepped inside, Linda started asking around. She wanted to know what she had just bought. Who built this place? Who lived here? And why had it been sitting empty for so long? The answers she got were strange. Uncomfortable. And nobody seemed to want to talk about it for very long. The mansion was built back in the early 1900s by a wealthy businessman. A man who made his fortune during a time when money flowed quietly and questions were rarely asked. He lived there alone for years. No wife. No children. Just him and a staff that came and went without ever saying much. Then one day, he vanished. No goodbye. No funeral. No forwarding address. The house was locked up. The staff stopped coming. And the mansion just sat there. Waiting. Watching. Slowly being swallowed by time. Over the decades, a few people tried to buy it. A developer in the 70s. A young couple in the 80s. None of them stayed long. One family moved out after just 3 weeks and refused to say why. Another buyer walked through once, turned around at the front door, and never came back. The neighbors Linda spoke to remembered the house from when they were kids. They said strange noises came from inside at night. Footsteps. Doors slamming. Even though nobody lived there. Parents told their children to stay away. It became the kind of place you didn't talk about. You just avoided. And then there was the basement. One older man told Linda something that made her pause. He said that back in the day, workers had been hired to clear out the house. But when they tried to go into the basement, they stopped. Something about the air down there. Something about what they saw. He didn't know the details. But he remembered hearing that they locked it up and left. And nobody had gone down there since. Linda stood there listening. Her heart was beating a little faster now. She thanked him. She walked back to her car. And she stared at those keys in her hand. She knew what she had to do next. Linda moved in the very next day. She didn't have much to bring. Just the bags from her car. A few tools she bought from a discount store. A flashlight. Some cleaning supplies. That was it. The moment she stepped through the doorway, the smell hit her. Mold. Rot. Decades of decay trapped inside walls that hadn't seen fresh air in years. The floors creaked under her feet. Some board snapped completely. She had to watch every single step. The first room she walked into had a collapsed ceiling. Chunks of plaster and wood were scattered across the floor like a war zone. Water damage had stained the walls black. The windows were all shattered. Birds had nested in the corners. There was no electricity. No running water. No heat. It was worse than the photos. So much worse. She stood there in the middle of the destroyed room and felt the weight of it all crash down. What had she done? How was she supposed to fix this? She had no money. No help. No experience. She was a 62-year-old woman with nothing but a flashlight and a broken house that nobody wanted. She almost walked out. Right then. Right there. But she didn't. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She started small. Clearing debris one handful at a time. Sweeping dust. Pulling out rotted wood. Scrubbing walls until her hands ached. She worked from sunrise to sunset. Some days she made progress. Other days it felt like the house was fighting back. A pipe would burst. A floor would give out. A wall would crumble the moment she touched it. She slept on the floor in the one room that still had four solid walls. She wrapped herself in blankets and listened to the house settle and groan around her. Sometimes she heard things. Sounds she couldn't explain. Creaks from rooms she wasn't in. Whispers in the wind that came through the broken windows. But the one place she hadn't touched yet was the basement. Every time she walked past that door, something stopped her. A chill. A hesitation. A feeling she couldn't name. Until one day, she couldn't ignore it anymore. It was late afternoon. The light was fading. Linda had been working upstairs all day and her body was exhausted. But something kept pulling her attention back to that basement door. She had avoided it for weeks. But today felt different. She grabbed her flashlight. She walked over slowly. Her hand rested on the doorknob. It was cold. Colder than it should have been. She turned it. The door opened with a long, heavy creak that echoed through the empty house. The smell that came up was thick. Damp earth. Old air. Something metallic underneath it all. She pointed the flashlight down the stairs. The beam barely cut through the darkness. The steps were wooden. Rotted in some places. She tested the first one with her foot. It held. She went down slowly. One step at a time. Each one groaning under her weight. The air got colder the deeper she went. Her breath came out in small clouds. The walls were stone. Wet. Covered in something dark she didn't want to think about. When she reached the bottom, she swept the flashlight across the room. It was bigger than she expected. Low ceiling. Dirt floor in some areas. Old furniture covered in sheets. Boxes stacked in corners. Shelves lined with jars she couldn't see inside. And then her light hit the far wall. Something wasn't right. The stones didn't match. There was a section that looked newer. Painted over. Covered up. She walked closer. Her heart was pounding now. She pressed her hand against it. It felt loose. Hollow behind it. She found a rusted crowbar near one of the shelves. She wedged it into the crack. She pulled. The false wall broke away easier than she thought. Dust exploded into the air. She coughed. Waved it away. And then she shined her light inside. Her breath stopped. There were metal boxes. Shelves stacked with old wooden crates. Wrapped paintings leaning against the walls. Rows of glass cases holding things she couldn't even name. Items carefully stored. Preserved. Hidden. She stepped closer. Her hands were shaking. She opened the first box. And everything changed. Inside the first box were stacks of old currency. Not regular bills. These were vintage. Rare denominations that hadn't been printed in over a century. Mint condition. Wrapped in protective paper like someone knew exactly what they were worth. She opened another crate. Inside were coins. Gold coins. Silver coins. Some she recognized. Others had markings in languages she didn't understand. They felt heavy in her hand. Real. Solid. Untouched by time. But that wasn't all. The wrapped paintings leaning against the wall weren't just old art. When she carefully peeled back the cloth on one of them, she saw a signature in the corner. A name she had heard before. A famous name. Her stomach flipped. The glass cases held jewelry. Rings with stones that caught her flashlight beam and scattered color across the walls. Necklaces. Bracelets. Watches with intricate designs that looked like they belonged in a museum. There were documents too. Sealed envelopes. Stocks and bonds from companies that no longer existed. Property deeds. Certificates written in careful handwriting on thick yellowed paper. Linda didn't sleep that night. She sat on the basement floor surrounded by decades of hidden wealth and tried to process what she was looking at. She didn't know the value yet. But she knew it was significant. Life-changing. Impossible to ignore. The next morning she made calls. She reached out to appraisers. Antique experts. Historians. People who dealt with estates and rare collections. She was careful. She didn't tell them everything. Just enough to get them interested. They came one by one. And every single person who walked into that basement had the same reaction. Silence. Shock. Disbelief. The authentication process took weeks. Each item was examined. Verified. Documented. The paintings alone were worth more than Linda had earned in her entire life. The coins and currency were valued in the hundreds of thousands. The jewelry pushed the total even higher. When the final appraisal came back, Linda sat down. She read the number 3 times. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. The total value of everything hidden in that basement was just over $2.4 million. Linda went from sleeping in her car to sitting on a fortune she never imagined existed. But she didn't rush. She didn't blow the money. She didn't run away from the mansion that changed everything. She stayed. The first thing she did was hire contractors. Real ones this time. People who knew how to bring old buildings back to life. She worked alongside them every single day. She wanted to be part of the process. She wanted to honor what the house had given her. Room by room, the mansion transformed. The collapsed ceilings were rebuilt. The broken windows were replaced with glass that let sunlight pour in for the first time in decades. The floors were refinished. The walls were repaired and painted. The overgrown yard was cleared and turned into a garden that bloomed with color. It took nearly a year. But when it was finished, the mansion didn't just look livable. It looked magnificent. Linda decided not to sell it. This house had saved her life. It had pulled her out of the darkest place she had ever been. So she turned it into something meaningful. She opened parts of it to the public. She hosted community events. She let local artists display their work in the halls. She gave tours and told the story of what she found in the basement and how it all happened. People came from everywhere. They wanted to see the woman who bought a $6 mansion and found millions. They wanted to hear her voice. See her smile. Understand how someone could fall so far and rise so high. And when they asked her what the experience taught her, she always said the same thing. She said that rock bottom has a trap door. And sometimes when you fall through it, you don't land in a darker place. You land somewhere you were always meant to be. She said the mansion didn't just give her money. It gave her purpose again. It gave her a reason to wake up. It reminded her that even when the whole world walks away, there's still something worth fighting for. The money should have meant peace. But the moment the story went public, the mansion stopped feeling quiet. Linda started getting letters. Some were kind. Most were not. Strangers claimed the items were stolen. A man she had never met said he was a relative of the original owner. He demanded everything back. Another person offered her cash on the spot, just to take a look in the basement. When she said no, the messages turned ugly. Then the city called. They were polite, but firm. They asked for paperwork. They asked for dates. They asked how she knew the collection was legal to keep. They reminded her that the house had been abandoned for decades, and that found property can bring problems no one expects. For the first time since she opened that hidden wall, Linda felt the same fear she used to feel in her car at night. Not fear of being broke. Fear of losing the one thing that finally pulled her back to life. So she did the only smart thing. She locked everything down. She moved the valuables into secure storage. She hired a lawyer. She stopped talking to the press. And she went back to the basement alone, not to search for money, but to search for answers. She stood in front of the broken wall again. The air was still cold. The silence still heavy. She traced the stones with her fingers, slow and careful, like the house might speak if she listened hard enough. And that's when she noticed it. One stone near the floor didn't match the others. It had a tiny scratch mark, like someone had pried it before. Linda pushed. The stone shifted. Behind it was a thin envelope wrapped in oilcloth. The paper was yellow and brittle. But the writing on the front was still clear. It said, in simple letters, "For the one who finds this." Linda swallowed hard. Her hands shook as she opened it, because whatever was inside wasn't just a clue. It was the truth.